All right, so by a show of hands, how many of you here are interested in people's stories? I'm going to go ahead and assume you raised your hands because I can't see anything. The light is absolutely blinding me. but no, I can actually. And thank you for raising your hands because I do want to talk a little bit about how stories affect us and the power that stories have, as well as the power of human interaction. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I wanted to go into Boston. I had no plan in mind. I had nowhere to be, but I missed the city, so I decided that I'd take the T in, or the subway if you're not from Boston. I went to Davis Square Station, and when I got there, I saw a man, probably in his 30s. He had a scruffy beard, and he was busking. He was playing music for donations. His guitar looked eerily similar to the one I have, and the song he was playing was one of my personal favorites, Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. Now, as my father once said, there's only two types of people in the world: people who are Pink Floyd fans and people who don't appreciate music. So I decided that I'd be a good music lover and an even better son, and I'd go talk to this man. I gestured to ask if I could sit next to him, and he said, okay, albeit a little reluctantly. I waited for him to finish his song, and then I looked over at him and I said, how are you doing? We got to talking. We stepped outside for a little bit. He said he could take a little break. And we talked about a lot of things. We talked about music in general, our mutual love for guitars. We talked about Pink Floyd. He even handed me a few of his CDs, which I must confess I haven't heard yet. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't have a single device that plays CDs. But that is incredible, and that is another TED Talk for another time. Having said that, we chatted. We talked about a lot of things, and he told me that he loved slow rock because of the way it made him feel. He also said that he was sure he would make it someday against all odds. Now, I don't remember his name. I think it was Jim, but it doesn't matter. I don't know if I'll ever talk to him again, and I don't know if I'll ever see him again. But this fleeting interaction with this delusionally optimistic musician touched me and left me enriched. You see, 4 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. In the fall of 2013, I moved from a sunny, warm place on the west coast of India to a significantly less sunny, less warm place right here in Massachusetts. One was famous for its spicy seafood and crowded streets, and the other mostly for its overpriced hipster coffee. As you can imagine, the transition between Mumbai, India, and Somerville, Massachusetts wasn't an easy one. But in my transition, in all of those layers of culture shock and adaptation, that question, how are you doing, played a much bigger role than I could have ever anticipated. Being born and bred in different parts of India and growing up with protective parents meant that talking to strangers was never something I was encouraged to do. In fact, as a lot of international students and staff will be able to testify, small talk with strangers is largely an awkward concept outside of America, and there is no mechanical or systematic way to engage in it. But what small talk taught me was to stop seeing people as just human beings walking around or as some data points on a chart in my classroom and start valuing them for the stories that they brought, for the individuals that they are. My transition from a society like India, where community is valued so deeply, yet there is no cushion of small talk, to one like America, where individuality always comes first, yet people have a stepping stone to more meaningful conversation, that transition opened my eyes. I was a fish out of water when I first got here, and the only way that I could make friends or get answers to my questions was by striking up conversations with random strangers. And I continue to do that to this day. In fact, this past summer, I worked at a tech firm in Palo Alto. I would often take Ubers and Lyfts to different parts of the Bay to work sometimes. And I made it a point, a personal practice, to always sit in front in these cars. I'd always try to have conversations with the driver. Often, it would start with that same question, how are you doing? And often, it would start with some other manufactured variant of interaction. We'd talk about the music that was playing, or the weather, sports, something like that. One time, I got into a car with a man named Asif. Asif and I talked about a lot of things, but a couple of minutes into our conversation, he told me about how much he missed his home country, Afghanistan. He said that he missed the weather, the streets of Kabul, and most importantly, this was really important to him, he missed the dried fruits. At that point, all we had was chit-chat. We weren't really talking about anything meaningful. But another 10 minutes later, Asif and I really began to open up. But at that point, we had arrived at our destination. So Asif pulled over, and it seemed like he had a little bit of free time, and I had nowhere to be either, at least immediately. So we kept talking. I couldn't really see him. It was pitch black outside, and he wouldn't look at me while he was talking, but he really had started telling me some deeply personal things at this point. He said that he missed his family, he missed his siblings and his parents, and he told me that he was always worried for them. He'd have to call them every morning to find out if they were safe or if they were even alive. They lived in a particularly war-torn part of Afghanistan, and Asif said that thoughts of them kept him up at night. After another 10 minutes or so, he looked over at me, eyes welling up, and said, "Look, man, you should go. I'm holding you here for too long, but I enjoyed sharing my story with you. Here's my card. Maybe one day you can come over for some Afghan food." That conversation was deeply therapeutic. For Asif, I can imagine, but for me as well. The both of us opened up to complete strangers, and all we had to build off of was that meaningless chit-chat about dried fruits. And by the way, I never ended up going to Asif's house for any Afghan food, and I don't know where he is today, although I do wish the best for him and for his loved ones. But who am I to determine what's meaningful and meaningless? All my evidence is anecdotal, and I'm just a 21-year-old standing here telling you to talk to strangers. But I do want my story to serve as a vessel to convey a skill set that every single person in this room already possesses, but may or may not have tapped into. You see, the way it works is that small talk is usually regarded as polite conversation about unimportant or uncontroversial topics, especially as engaged in on social occasions. I pulled that one off Google. But that's not all small talk does. It allows us to open up a window, to take the temperature, to gauge whether or not it's okay to progress into something more probing, something more incisive that'll help us get to know the person better. But another thing small talk does is that it offers us the ability to see people in a more nuanced light. The mere exposure effect is this psychological phenomenon because of which we all want to categorize everything we see. Now, I am oversimplifying, but essentially all it means is that when we see someone, we want answers to questions. Often, those aren't very polite questions. They have to do with matters of race, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, gender identity. And it is those same questions and that need, that inbuilt need to categorize, that makes us biased and prejudiced. But what if we could stop seeing people as just cogs in a wheel or as a sum of their character traits and start treating them as real individual humans with their own stories? Maybe then we'll learn more from human interaction than we'll ever learn from a class, a book, a film, and I hope this is true, any TED Talk you could ever watch. In my family, the value ascribed to strangers was not very high. In most Indian families, since we have big families and we're largely based in community, talking to strangers is deemed unnecessary and often dangerous. In fact, so much as a simple hello or good morning to a stranger on the streets of Bombay will do nothing but evoke suspicious glances. But just because the stepping stones in conversation aren't quite the same, doesn't mean that people aren't curious, and it doesn't mean that people don't have incredible stories. This winter break, I was lucky enough to go home, and I talked to a man, a 97-year-old man, at a South Bombay restaurant about British rule in India. He talked to me about the education system in the 20s and 30s, and how he watched it evolve firsthand from glorifying British rule to absolutely demonizing colonialism. Now, that's something I'd never learned in my 4 years of high school history, and something that I would have probably never learned if I hadn't met this man and just struck up a conversation with him. And that's the beauty of humanity. We're all curious, but beyond that, and this is our best-kept secret, we all care about each other's stories. Stories provide perspective. Getting to see things from another person's point of view can be eye-opening. Stories sometimes provide comfort. Just getting to know that someone else is going through the same things that you are can make you feel a lot better. But above all, stories create a community. They bring people together. An initiative from a few years ago, Humans of New York, has 18 million likes on Facebook at last count and engages over 100 million people with every single post on various social media platforms. And that's because we're all curious. We all care about each other's stories. So go out today and engage with someone. Start with small talk and try to form a real connection with a stranger. It's easy to do it from behind your computer screen, but no tightly cropped, high-quality image with a little quote next to it will ever do justice to the goldmine that is real human interaction. So I invite you, no matter who you are, introvert or extrovert, where you come from, how you were raised, to go out today and talk to a stranger. Talk to the cashier at the next store you go to, talk to that coworker you never get a chance to talk to. Talk to your hairdresser. Sometimes people will try to reach out to you, and when they do, don't be afraid to connect. We're all programmed to believe that small talk is nuisance, and we just want to get it over with. And for busy people like you and I, that can be an easy trap to fall into. But as Sir Ian McKellen once said, and I'm heavily paraphrasing here, you could be on your phone with your face buried in, and the love of your life could walk right past you, and that would be a shame if the two of you didn't get to talk just because no one wanted to make that first step. We're all full of questions, and you never know who has the answers. It could be the person on the other side of the street, it could be your next Uber driver, and it could be your next best friend. So don't be afraid to ask.